The 35th anniversary of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles saw the release of their first ever 100th issue. But running parallel to the City at War saga that concluded with that issue was the spiritual successor of Secret History of the Foot Clan. It's a story centered around the journey of the Shredder back in Hell, fighting to free his soul and finding his way back to what really mattered to him the most: love. Today, I will talk about the Shredder in Hell miniseries. Matteo Santaluca worked on the Secret History of the Foot Clan early in the IDW run, when the writers were still discovering the mythology. His work influenced the course of the relationship between the Turtles and the Afterlife. For Secret History, Matteo's created two new characters, Kitsune and Takeshi Tatsuo. The naming of these characters was informed by their meanings in Japanese. Kitsune meant fox, and hinted at her mythical nature, and Takeshi Tatsuo meant dragon warrior, which at the time sounded cool, but that was pretty much all there was to it. There was no master plan yet on how that name could influence the Shredder's arc. After the story was published, Matteos found out that Tom Waltz, Bobby Curnow, and Kevin Eastman were working on transforming Kitsune into a member of a pantheon of demigods. This was not how Matteos pictured the character to evolve, and it was a bit of a shock to him. Sometime later, while drawing some pages for issue 36, he decided to hide a figure of a dragon among the icons of the demigods in the ancient scroll. He did this to hide his intentions for the future of the Shredder, Takeshi, and Kitsune in plain sight. He never mentioned this detail to Bobby, Tom, or Kevin, but apparently they got the idea. In a later story arc drawn by Dave Wachter, Kitsune created a painting of a dragon and a phoenix fighting each other, and it seemed like they were all pointing at the same conclusion without talking to each other. When the time came to write Shredder in Hell, Matteos' priority was to tie all the loose ends: Kitsune, Takeshi, the Pantheon, the Dragon, and Oroku Saki. Matteos now had to create a human side for Saki while keeping his core traits, like his sense of authority and need for control. This was essential to allow the character to grow enough to make the right decisions in the story's climax. The miniseries was initially intended to have 6 parts, but it had to be constrained to 5 issues of 20 pages each. To Matteos' surprise, Nickelodeon was okay with most of his ideas for the story. They only had one request: to include the Turtles somehow in the story. Since the miniseries happens in the afterlife, Matteos devised a smart way to incorporate them: demonic zombie turtles. Shredder in Hell was Matteos' first time drawing a series with digital pencils, but by the second issue, he realized that with his obsession for details, he would never be able to keep pace, and he decided to only use digital pencils to design the page layouts. Despite the digital elements, Matteos inked all the issues on paper. The story also placed an important role in Splinter, who had to be included in a creative way to guide Saki through Hell. However, this wasn't always the plan, as Oroku Maji, Saki's father, and Kitsune were considered as options to guide him in early drafts. Matteos worked closely with Marcelo Costa and Davi Khalil on colors, and letters were done by Sean Lee. But Shredder in Hell wasn't Saki's first time in that realm, and to get the full context, I'll explain Shredder's journey up to this point. The earliest memories we have of Shredder's soul were during feudal Japan, when he was incarnated as Takeshi Tatsuo, a powerful swordsman who worked for the Yu clan. As I mentioned earlier, his name translates into Dragon Warrior. His master ordered his assassination, but the attempt resulted in Takeshi being the only survivor of that battle. Having suffered grave injuries, he was rescued by Kitsune, who brought him back to full health and promised him immortality in exchange for doing the deeds of an iron demon who was actually Krang. Takeshi wiped out the Yu clan and founded the Foot Clan. After discovering his alliance with Kitsune and seeing him go through a rejuvenation ritual, they decided to kill him to bring the clan back to an honorable path. The leader of this rebellion was Oroku Maji, who finally ended Takeshi's life. But at that moment, Kitsune warned him that his death would come from his own house, implying that someone in his family would kill him. The years passed and the prophecy showed signs of being true when his son, Oroku Saki, started showing signs of remembering Takeshi's life. Saki grew up with personality traits similar to Takeshi's. When both Hamato Yoshi and him were promoted by their masters, Maji and Masato, to the rank of Chonin instead of just him, he got really frustrated, as it seemed that no matter what he did, his father would never see that he was destined for greatness. Kitsune took advantage of this frustration and led Saki back to a book written by Takeshi, with the secret history of the Foot Clan. After meeting with Kitsune, he remembered his past life and then killed his masters, Maji and Masato, fulfilling Kitsune's prophecy. As you should already know, Saki became Jonin of the Foot Clan and eventually killed Tang Shen, Hamato Yoshi, and his 4 sons, 5 of whom would later be reincarnated as Splinter and the Ninja Turtles. Still, extending Saki's life for 30 days wasn't permanent enough for Kitsune, and one day she found a way to make him genuinely immortal. For that, they performed a deadly ritual in which Saki committed suicide and his corpse was sealed in a coffin filled with pure ooze. The substance was supposed to prevent him from returning to the cycle of reincarnation, fortifying his soul over the centuries, awaiting resurrection as the Dragon Warrior through a blood ritual generations later. But his soul did go into the afterlife. There, a kid demon guided him to the castle of someone who was reigning over the hellish realm. With the help of other warriors who were also trapped in hell, he took over the castle and defeated the king. To his surprise, this king was an older version of himself, implying that this would end up being his ultimate fate. Or at least that was what the kid demon made him understand. In the present day, Kurai performed a blood ritual that brought Saki back to life. But Saki wasn't the only survivor of that old story. Yoshi and his sons reincarnated, and after they started remembering the role Saki played in their previous lives, they started fighting against the Foot Clan. This led to a climactic conclusion during the Vengeance Saga, where Splinter and Shredder finally fought each other in a battle that ended with Saki committing seppuku. This was already a significant departure from the portrayal of the original Shredder in the Mirage comics, who did not go down honorably. Instead, this Shredder accepted his defeat and promised Splinter they would meet again in the forest of their childhood, the place they used to call the Dream. He also promised Kitsune that he would find a path back to her. But as definitive as this sequence felt, Kitsune still had other plans. Plans that involved bringing her father back to reality, the Dragon God. Let's focus on Shredder in Hell now. In this story, Saki ended up in the afterlife again, but to his surprise, he found himself in the Dream, a metaphysical version of the forest where he and Yoshi used to play as kids. But the peacefulness of this place was broken by a very disappointed voice in his head. Someone who was against everything that Splinter talked to him about. Saki assumed that this was the voice of Takeshi, but then he was attacked by the actual Takeshi, who revealed that the voice belonged to the dragon, and together they were the key to unlock divine power, as they both carried the Dragon God's spirit. Saki was confused. Since they were supposed to be the same soul, this meant that something was keeping his spirit divided. Tatsuo almost drowned Saki there, but he was timely rescued by Splinter, who was there to honor his promise of helping him know the dream once again. Splinter theorized that the reason his soul was divided there was that perhaps he wasn't still certain of the path he chose when he died. He also confirmed that the source of the incommensurable power he always felt destined for was only the spirit of the Dragon God's wishes, and it became the source of all the anguish he had to endure to achieve it. Saki was surprised to see Splinter there, as they were both alive the last time they saw each other. Splinter explained that he was from some point in the future, and that this place was just one of the many realms of the afterlife. A realm that took a form that reflected the soul that visited it. But something there never changed. The Tree of Life, a matrix for all human souls. Every being that has ever lived on Earth was a product of the mysterious deity sleeping inside the tree, and all their experiences were nothing but dreams. That deity was the Dreamer. Splinter, Shredder, Takeshi, and Yoshi were all but dreams of the entity sleeping inside the tree. But just like the tree was a vessel for the dreamer, Saki was a vessel for its counterpart, the Dragon God. This meant that Saki had never experienced an existence without that spirit imprisoned inside his soul. The dragon spirit was the cornerstone of who he thought he was, and this was the root of all his conflicts, fears, and lust for power and control. Despite choosing the dream before dying, the dragon spirit was still giving him doubts. But next to the Tree of Life, he could finally choose his own, either giving himself up for the Dragon God's agenda, or letting go of all of his fears and accepting there was no such thing as control. Giving up on his quest for control and becoming one with the Dreamer would free him from the burden of the dragon. In other words, to get rid of the dragon's destiny of ending all human life on Earth, he needed to be Oroku Saki no more. But for Saki, it felt like both options meant the same, the end of who he was. He needed to take the reins of his fate, because he promised Kitsune he would find his way back to her. After seeing Saki run away from the Tree of Life, Tang Shen appeared and encouraged Yoshi to go after him to save the world. He chased Saki outside of the forest, where Splinter was transformed back into a simple domestic rat, one that could still guide Saki on his journey to the afterlife. On their way, they started facing against people who Saki killed in his past lives, including the turtles. Of course, these weren't really their souls, and when Saki used the Dragon God's power inside of him to get rid of them, they unified into the shape of his former master, Masato, and then his father, Maji. This endless fight was pointless, and when he met the Kid Demon again, he said that he simply assisted the underworld travelers so they could find whatever they were looking for. In his case, Saki seemed to be waging endless wars with all those that crossed his path. This implied that his previous stay in hell didn't exactly mean what he thought it meant. Hurt, he followed someone who looked like Kitsune, who later betrayed and buried him under the ground. This Kitsune wasn't on his side. She was helping Takeshi, who went to see the Dragon God on the flip side of the Tree of Life. But the dragon wouldn't accept his soul, which was divided, perpetuating dissonance between the egos of his unique self. Takeshi needed to prevent this from happening. Saki shouldn't be allowed to wake up from his dream. Saki escaped from his trap and asked the Kid Demon how to get back to the dream, but he, being a low entity, wouldn't know. Only ascending spirits like Splinter had access to the dream. Unfortunately, Splinter gave up Nirvana when he came into that place. Shredder realized he was never really in charge of his destiny, as he was manipulated by Kitsune all this time. She never wanted to give him power out of love, she just wanted to free the dragon from its prison. This moment of weakness was enough for the creature that was bullying him to eat him. Splinter tried to help Saki, but this cost him his life. After seeing the sacrifice made by his friend, Shredder freed himself with the dragon's magic and discovered that this monster's real face was that of an older Saki. The old man then told him that Kitsune not only changed their bodies, but she also changed the very nature of their spirit. With the monster dead, Saki went to check on Splinter, but his spirit was gone. Feeling the shockwave of Saki's actions, the Dragon God sent Takeshi after him, knowing that no matter how much power Saki had in him, his refusal to join the dragon made his link to the dragon power too fragile, and he would stand no chance against Takeshi. Takeshi ambushed Saki, and found out that Saki's driving force was Kitsune. He revealed to him that he spent centuries with Kitsune, compared to the couple of decades Saki did, and during that time, her plans were not hidden from him. So why didn't she tell Saki about the dragon spirit? What was she afraid of? Takeshi dragged Saki to the dragon's castle, but a mysterious mist quickly followed, covering the entire fortress. Saki was taken in front of the dragon god under what seemed to be the Tree of Life. The dragon needed his spirit back to escape from his sibling's trap and return to the body Kitsune had prepared after so many centuries. But with his soul divided like this, it was impossible. The mysterious mist reached that chamber and revealed itself to be a human, Hamato Yoshi, who came to rescue Saki after getting a second chance. Yoshi fought against Takeshi to give Saki the time to escape from the castle, using his dragon spirit powers. In the final fight between Yoshi and Takeshi, delusions were put aside, as Yoshi reminded Takeshi that he was not a god himself, but a lucid dream, channeling the divine, and soon Saki would become lucid too, and Takeshi would be gone forever. Saki escaped the castle, and with the help of Yoshi, they returned to the dream and the Tree of Life. There, Yoshi was greeted by Tang Shen, who decided to stay behind as Nirvana had no meaning without Yoshi. Having given up on Nirvana, Yoshi and Shen decided to return to the Tree of Life to reincarnate and live anew in the earthly realms, hoping to find each other and be a family again. This seemingly random event would probably inform Saki's decisions later in this story. That was when the Dreamer came out of the tree. This caused unrest in the Dragon God. Were his sister to wake Saki, his chances of returning to Earth would be gone. In a desperate measure, he took Takeshi's spirit. The Dreamer explained to Saki that for humans, the path of knowing their true selves was the path of forgetting about themselves. But Saki's past incarnations were all shared with the dragon, so the only way for Saki to learn about his true self was for her to explain how it all began. The Dreamer and the dragon were the children of Brahma, who conceived them to operate within his creation. One would maintain and the other would destroy. But they never knew exactly the full extent of his master plan. To better understand their creator, they became creators themselves. She gave life to birth, and the dragon gave life to hunger. The sentient beings they created gave them some insights into their mysterious purpose. But the dragon was never satisfied, and this led to multiple extinctions. To ease his nonconformity, the Dreamer helped him design his ultimate project, a pantheon of demigods wise and powerful enough to manipulate and intervene in the settlement of creation. The Dreamer, in order to replicate her father's divine concept and be to this universe what he was to the multiverse, fell into an eternal sleep. And through her dreams, she lived the lives of humans, creatures unaware of their creators, but able to create and destroy just like them. The dragon did not like this, and through countless millennia tried to infiltrate her dreams, moving from soul to soul, influencing them to perform the most terrible deeds. She had no choice but to design a prison for him, a single mortal soul from which he could never escape, Saki's soul. The dragon then became bound to the eternal cycle of life and death that all living things endure. But Kitsune never lost track of her father's location, and she set a plan in motion to bend matter and spirit. And to do this, she needed his trust and love. Bringing back her father wasn't without sacrifices, as she would lose Saki forever. This big sacrifice gave Saki a final hint that she really loved him. Realizing he held his destiny in his own hands, he renounced everything he thought he was, breaking apart from the dragon. That was when the dragon attacked Saki, who now used the power of the dream to shape himself into a new person who could face the dragon. Both became warriors and engaged in battle until the dream interceded. In the earthly realm, Kitsune sacrificed her sister Aka to use her godly blood in a ritual. At the same time, Dreamer told Saki that he may have given Kitsune a choice out of the eternal loneliness gods often endure. In this scenario, reuniting with her would prevent the return of the dragon god, so she told Saki to follow the promise he made to Kitsune. Since the only path back to her was by allowing his soul to be taken by the dragon god, Saki accepted his fate once again, but with a different purpose and with the help of present-day Splinter. After returning to Earth in Shredder's incomplete body, the dragon god commanded Kitsune to get him the Kira no Ken, the Sword of Hate, one of Takeshi's treasures that was now in the hands of Karai. This story continued in the main title pages in the climax of the City at War saga, which I'll cover very soon. Splinter still had Saki's skull in the present, as he never trusted Kitsune with it. After recovering the Kira no Ken, the dragon could free itself from Saki, and all he needed to unbind himself from the netherworld was the blood of Karai, the so-called granddaughter of the dragon. But Alapex rescued Karai from this ritual at the last second, giving everyone else some time to tackle the problem at its root. Yoshi and Shen appeared again in the afterlife to bring Saki back home. They told him that Kitsune was misguided by her loneliness. She didn't need her creator, she needed Saki. And this made her hesitate in every single step of her mission. Unfortunately, for Saki to return to the world of the living, someone needed to give up their life. Yoshi revealed that he was the key to this balance. On Earth, Splinter gave his final goodbye to his allies and family and offered his life to bring Saki back to his body. With this sacrifice, Splinter achieved Nirvana, at least until the events I already mentioned in this video, and without his vessel, the dragon died. Saki and Kitsune reunited, implying that the two would never feel lonely again. The death of the dragon left some ramifications, or at least his dragon scales did, as they were used to enhance beings and mutants and were a key element in the origin of Venus. But peace wouldn't last long. Kitsune's brother, the Rat King, would put his Armageddon game into action, forcing Shredder to train the Splinter clan in the mystic arts, and Kitsune to create a plan to put an end to her siblings, including herself. But that's a story for another day. To me, one of the most significant contributions of this story is the creation myth of the IDW universe, a syncretized version of many religions, very in line with this version of the Turtles, which also is a mix of all the versions that came before it. By choosing an amalgamation of different beliefs, Santaluco avoided telling another typical creation story from the Abrahamic point of view. Mateus borrowed heavily from religions that have reincarnation as part of their beliefs, like Hinduism and Buddhism, where Brahma is a deity that created the world and all beings. It's part of a trinity with Vishnu and Shiva. The Dreamer seems inspired by Vishnu, a preserver and protector of the universe. She has blue skin like him, but only 2 arms. Tom Waltz would later use the Dreamer in the mobile game Splintered Fate. The Dragon God seems inspired by Shiva, a god of destruction who also has a 3rd eye. Another interesting detail that was probably just a happy accident is that the Portuguese translation of the Shredder is Destruidor, which translates to English as the Destroyer. Considering Mateus is Brazilian, one can't help but wonder if that played a part in figuring out this mythology. Mateus, intentionally or not, also made an interesting story about agnosticism. The idea that humans, just like the Dreamer and the Dragon, will never be able to know why they were created and have to figure things out on their own fits very well with the philosophy behind agnosticism. As far as we know, the Dreamer and the Dragon may be completely wrong about their father and his intentions. Encouraging the philosophies of agnosticism, the characters that were aware of who created them and why caused a lot of collateral damage. Kitsune even sacrificed her happiness and a sister for her cause. So in this context, an agnostic philosophy of only being sure that you can never be sure worked better than a complete certainty that only made Kitsune feel infinitely lonely. Then we have the Shredder, a character constantly fighting with predeterminism, always looking to control things to please the Dragon God. It was quite an intelligent touch to make him give up all his control in order to achieve total freedom from his god. As evidence of his character growth, he could only do that by putting aside his pride and trusting in the people who really cared for him. Ultimately, Saki's journey through hell and back is another iteration of the hero's journey, and in this case, it brought him back to the Turtles comics, and redeemed him, at least in the story so far. What are your thoughts on the story of the Shredder so far? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, see you in the sewers!